Wish I could play with both hands. That'd be more impressive. Hi, little FBI man on my camera. I see you right there. How are you doing? Today we're going to be talking about Post-Impressionism. More importantly, three big names in the movement. We're going to be talking about Vince. I don't know. I'll put him one of these sides. I don't know. Vincent van Gogh, George Seurat, as well as Henry Toulouse, as well as what inspired them as artists, and three paintings, one for each of them, that really exemplifies these themes that are in a lot of their works. Words of Natalia Brutsky, while Impressionism was a step and a revolutionary towards artistic medium stifled by academic conventions, Post-Impressionism takes many steps by being more revolutionary by liberating colors and opening it up to new, unknown horizons. Wish I was that smart. The words of Natalia Brudskaya, whilst Impressionisms marked the first steps toward modern painting by revolutionizing a lot of the artistic medium stifled by academic conventions, Post-Impressionism was even more revolutionary by totally flipping the conventions of color theory and how we have to paint certain things the way that they're supposed to be, as well as opening up to unknown horizons. Unlike previous movements, Post-Impressionism was fraught with mostly self-taught artists who learned from each other, in fact. Instead of the constant one-upsmanship of the Renaissance, to then Baroque period, to then Rococo, to put in more contrast or making things brighter or making things more fancy and fantastical and go beyond the ideas of anything that anybody's ever done before and use real gold and try and get the exact muscle fibers of each arm. These were now just artists similar to each other, all just trying to sell their art to somebody that nobody else wanted to buy because it was something different and new and didn't look quite right, and looked, in often some cases, like our good friend Vincent van Gogh here, kind of amateurish. Not to say that there was no schooling. In fact, a lot of these artists did go to schools in certain ways, through internships or looking at other artists for advice, especially when we look at Henry Toulouse, who actually took up a lot of professional painting classes. And it was during these classes that he found that he wanted to do something a little different than what most people were doing. Like many modern art movements, they're a lot shorter lived, making way for the next new movement and the next new craze that's going to come along. The Post-Impressionist movement was really only making it to about 30 years in age, which kind of cuts close to this guy right over here. And also, unlike previous movements, a lot of these artists didn't stay in one spot. Though a large focal point of it was Paris, a lot of them moved around a lot, trying to find their new inspiration, trying to find who they were going to learn from next and how they were going to better who they were as an artist. Most of their work was in solitary confinement as well. Instead of meeting for large movements to try and talk to each other and get back and forth, most of this was done on their own. In the case of Henry Toulouse, a lot of his inspiration came from his upbringing, and not necessarily his upbringing, but rather what has happened during his upbringing. At the age of 13, during an accident, he ended up breaking one of his legs, which less than a year later he would break his other leg, preventing them to not grow anymore since he's so young that the growth plate didn't grow. And not to throw shade, this is none of my opinion, but more than enough of the papers that I've read through were not very kind to the man's looks, with his purportedly large nose and thick lips. After taking a lot of art classes, his mother then enrolled him in a wonderful art school in the middle of Paris, where he would start to get teased a little bit for the way he looked, and it's kind of hard sometimes. School back then wasn't that easy either. Well, good old Henry wouldn't let that get him down. In fact, this was a lot of his inspiration for his work, and during self-portraits, he would often emphasize his cartoonish features, making it a bit of a joke on himself, and a lot of people appreciated that and kind of prevented him from getting bullied even further. And with certain deformities like this, good old Henry couldn't really spend time with a lot of ladies that were, let's say, normal, and in fact spent a lot of his times in cabarets and brothels, talking with women that were usually a little less attractive than normal. But it was a lot of these interactions that would actually inspire a lot of Henry's most famous pieces, which is a lot of his work of nude cabaret women. The reason for his large infatuation is what is believed is that he himself didn't feel quite as pretty as the average spring chicken, and that's how he felt about some of these women as well. And instead of letting them hide in the shadows or stay in these cabarets and doing whatever they're doing, actually bring light to this and bring not only just himself, but as well these women, and as well as any other person that kind of felt bad about themselves, as well as him or any other women that kind of felt this way about themselves. Brought them up, elevating themselves. In the case of Van Gogh, we see what is very common that you might see around Fullerton College themselves. The classic tortured artist that doesn't want to live in their small town and I want to go to the big city, Pa, and be a dancer and dance my heart away. Vincent van Gogh would spend most of his adult life kind of bouncing around from place to place trying to find his niche. Sometimes it was just working in coal mines, sometimes it was a pastor, sometimes it was an artist or a student or even a janitor just trying to make ends meet. Much like many art students that are trying to find their way, we can actually see a lot of Vincent van Gogh's process in trying to learn. We can see him drawing chairs, or we can see him drawing shoes, just trying to understand shading and shadow and really how things work. After years of toiling from town to town trying to find what he's good at, Vincent would finally find success and find pride in one of his earliest works, The Potato Eaters. And to some eyes, it's a little disturbing. And what Van Gogh would self-describe as his magnum opus piece, in 1885, The Potato Eaters, would actually exemplify a lot of themes that would be prevalent in a lot of his later works. And that's his obsession with depressing and kind of out-of-the-ordinary imagery. With the macabre, depressing, and sometimes out-of-the-ordinary. Taking place in the small town of Newnan, where his then-parents grew up and still lived for all of his life, we see a small family gathered around a table with only one lantern to light their whole night, and what would only be probably most of their night. We see nothing but potatoes and what looks like to be tea, as well as two large men of what Van Gogh himself would say. In a letter that he wrote to his brother Theo, Van Gogh would go on to say, "I have done it! I have made my first country painting. I have even captured the dirt on the man's hands that worked so hard for just those potatoes." It was in these next following letters that Theo himself would write back to Vincent, saying that he would love to support his brother and help him sell these paintings, which he would then soon later regret. Vincent van Gogh would try a lot of things that many other artists had tried before. Making portraits of certain people, drawing certain areas, just trying to sell and pass it off, whatever. But in a time where you have so much art, you really don't need that's just an impression of what you're supposed to look like. Something that to a lot of eyes seemed to be amateurish and not well thought out and rushed. Unlike our other masters of the craft, we would see a more careful and articulate approach to his impressions with George Seurat's work. The father of pointillism as well as proto-cubism had a much happier obsession, and though for the time, no, it wasn't opium. Seurat in fact had a large preoccupation with leisure and leisure activities such as the circus, or carnivals or festivals, or in his most famous work, Just a Day at the Park. In Seurat's painting The Circus, we see a lot of his common tropes with leisure, and in fact, it being a circus. We see a lot of people in the audience just relaxing, enjoying the show, and we see something that we wouldn't see in everyday life, and that's the very stretched and skinny and tendril-like people performing in the circus, performing acts that most people wouldn't see, as well as a thin halo around most of these people. Another small preoccupation that Seurat had was actually his large dedication to following basic rules. A large thing that we see in a lot of this painting is the emphasis upon upward moving lines, which indicate a lot of high energy and a lot of joy in the painting, as well as we see a lot of cool colors that are relaxing and calming to look at the eye, while yellow neutral colors make it seem kind of okay to look at. Hey, I forgot to film an ending to this video. So hopefully you can see, like many other artists, we all take inspiration from many different things. And we are no different than the artists of yesteryear or maybe even the future. We all have to learn somehow, maybe from fine art classes or maybe from learning from one friend to another. And sometimes it's hard and it's difficult, but we really just have to find that niche and that inspiration, and we too could maybe be the next Picasso or Van Gogh or something. I don't know. The answer's probably